This is crazy. I'm so excited you all are here today, and thank you to all of our engineers and flight controllers and astronauts for being here too. We're going to start by letting you all introduce yourself, and I would like you to add one more thing and say what you think we have to look forward to when it comes to exploring the universe. So, Al, why don't you start?
Okay, I'm Al Worden. I was on Apollo 15 back in 1971. And 48 years ago today, I started back to the Earth from the moon. Today. Okay? We landed in the Pacific Ocean on August 7th, 1971. It was a wonderful flight. Gave me kind of a feeling about what spaceflight's all about, and I'll tell you how I feel the future is in spaceflight. We're going to find another planet that we can go to when we can't live here anymore. That's what it's all about. The next step out is Mars, then we'll go further, we'll go further until we can get to a planet that we can live on when we can't live here anymore. That's what I see as the future.
Well, my name is Joey Lazaro. I was at Apollo 7 through Apollo 15, and back in 1968, so a long time ago. And I had 4 years there, and I had another 4 years at NASA headquarters after that for my last career in the Air Force. They were all Air Force guys, at least up to that point there. But yeah, I see a big future too. Al said most of the words that you'd like to say, and I think with a little funding, I think we can go a long ways. We need a national will to make it happen. You guys can help and talk to some of your politicians and get them up there and charge them up a little bit. Says we need to get up in space. We need to keep going with our technology. There's a lot of other problems that are going on in the world and in our country, but there's still room for funding to take us farther. We can't stop in the technology and the research and development and on into space and beyond.
Thank you, Joey. So I'm the most junior of the spacefarers here in the line.
He's calling you all old.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
Okay, you guys hear whatever you want to hear.
He said most.
All right. So who in the room is between 6 years of age and 10 years of age? Raise your hand. All right. That was the age I was when I was inspired by these guys and what they were doing. So thank you, both of you and all the rest of you. Awesome program. Okay, I was a shuttle pilot right at the end of the space shuttle program, STS-123 and 134. And we did such a bad job that retired that particular space shuttle and put it in LA at the California Science Center. I think that we are an exploring people. We're curious. If you think about exploration, maritime exploration, and the evolution of flying airplanes, in space, we're just scratching the surface. And so we have an exciting couple of centuries ahead of us. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to go to Mars. We're going to figure out how to get there faster. It's going to be little astronauts like here. You're 7 years old too, right? That's how old I was when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. I didn't have a suit like that. But anyway, these young people are the ones that are going to make the better, faster, cheaper technologies that are going to get us there. And we are going to continue to explore the universe.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yvonne Cagle. I'm your homegrown Novato astronaut. Go Hornets! Hey, all right, here we go. Novato High, Hornets, let's hear it. This is the only town that's had both an astronaut and a meteorite land and call its home. So again, to you all, round of applause. It is wonderful to be here. I wanted to say that this is great. I am in such stellar company, but my mission is you, because we are all going back to the moon, onto Mars, and beyond. And what I'm looking forward to as a physician and aerospace researcher is how the human body is going to change and evolve as we spend more and more time doing exploration in space and doing planetary operations, to the point that we may well find that the same people that we left the planet as are not the same people that we return as. Therefore, those galactic aliens that we go in search of may actually be you.
Well put, Yvonne. There might be one at the end of the table here, too. So, yeah, my name is Dan Bursch. I was a shuttle guy and space station guy. I was 12 years old 50 years ago when we first landed on the moon. I was at a tough summer camp. We didn't have TV. We just had radio. I remember listening to it and being inspired by that, and then eventually applying to become an astronaut. But a very exciting time, as everybody knows, especially people in the Bay Area. There's a lot of things going on, not only with human space flight, but with people. We have high schoolers now that are building and launching satellites in space. Now, albeit they're small, called CubeSats, that many of you have heard about before. Very exciting time in space, exciting time for commercial space. So thank you all for being here today, and looking forward to spending more time with all of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Steve Smith. I'm also from the Bay Area. Grew up in San Jose, and all of my schooling from kindergarten to college was here in the Bay Area. So for the kids in the audience, I think Yvonne and I are examples of you can go to the Bay Area to anywhere in the universe. So it's really a great thing to dream for. My colleagues asked me to pause for a second so we can express our gratitude. You are all here for free today. And you've come here today because you're interested and inspired by what we're doing in space. And it's really due to the graciousness of two families. And they're sitting here in the front. It's the Winans and Rayford family. So if you have a chance today, please thank them. Do it now, first of all. I mean, it's really rare in these times to have something that, you know, someone is so generous that they do for free. So if you see them, please thank them for that. So I had a chance to fly on the space shuttle 4 times, and I went to the Hubble Space Telescope and crawled around it and inside of it. Thank you, Ed. And when I was inside of it, I was thinking this is a special time machine. It's taking pictures of things that happened 14 billion years ago. So when we look at a picture, it's something that happened that long ago. And when you look at what Hubble has found us, it's told us that there are about 1 trillion galaxies. So there is no doubt that there's something else living in the universe. And maybe they're here today, already among us. But I think it's going to be really interesting in the years ahead to see who they are or what they're like. Are they little microbes, or are they 37 feet tall with 5 heads? Do they have arms? Do they speak or anything like that? So that'll be incredibly interesting. The other thing I'll say is I wish you could all go into space to see the Earth from space, because it is this special blue and green jewel, this marble, this island that's in this vast black ocean. And when you see it like that, it makes you realize we need to take care of it. In California, we're very sensitive about the environment and taking care of Mother Earth, but that's not really universally true. So I wish you could all go see that. And I wish we could fly all the leaders of the world in space so they could see how fragile this is. The other thing I will say is, we don't see borders from space. And so it really is one global family. And from that perspective, we've all been changed by seeing the Earth from space, because we are really one global community. And it's really important not only to take care of the Earth, but to promote peace and take care of each other. So the next time someone cuts you off on the freeway, take a deep breath and say, brother, sister, that's okay. We're all in this together. So thanks for coming today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Ed Rezak. You getting some feedback from somewhere? That'll work. Yeah. Hi, I'm Ed Rezak. I've never been to space, but I've been fortunate and blessed to have helped some of these guys get there, and ladies. I guess my first inspiration came while I was a kid. My dad was in the Air Force. We were stationed in Okinawa, and Gemini 8 had to come down a little earlier than expected, and was picked up in the Pacific and carried into Naha Port. on Okinawa. And I remember my mom bringing me out there, and can you hear me? Okay. My mom taking me up to the fence surrounding Naha Port and pointing down at the Mason with the capsule on it. Neil Armstrong was on that flight. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of joy. I've been doing this stuff since 1976, primarily focused on spacesuits and EVA, extravehicular activity, or spacewalks. What excites me about the future is I'm looking at it right here, and right there. I'm excited to see where the young people today take us. It blows my mind. So thanks for coming out.
Thank you. So we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. We'll come up on all the other 50th anniversary of the rest of the Apollo missions. So I want to start with you, Al. I think some people forget what a turbulent time the 60s and 70s were in this country. How much did the politics of the time influence what you were doing with the Apollo missions? And do you see any relevance in what space travel and space exploration can do for us now?
Yeah, there were there were turbulent times. As a matter of fact, I think international politics really made us go into space when we did. If you all remember, John Kennedy made a speech, both in Congress and at Rice University, saying that we're going to go to the moon and we're going to return the astronauts safely within 10 years. We actually beat that by about 10 months. But it was because of the difficulties that we were having with Russia at the time. And if you remember, they're the first ones that put something into space. They're the first country that put a human in space when almost around one time. He never quite made it. I guess we all know that. But that really pushed us into getting into the space program. And we did the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo program to go to the moon. Turbulent times between the U.S. and Russia pushed us into doing our program in space. Today, we probably have a little of the same kind of thing going on. We have a president who's pretty rough on everybody, and he's making everybody toe the mark around the world. And that is kind of pushing us back into the space program again. I think we're going to end up doing a lot more cooperatively than we did before. I think the country that is probably the chief competition for us today is not Russia, it's China. China is doing very, very well. They are the first country that was able to put a lander on the back side of the moon out of radio contact with Earth. They have a little satellite in orbit that they use as a relay satellite, and they're doing very, very well with that. And they're saying that they're going to go back to the moon in a couple of years. Whether they do or not, I don't know. They also have a space station that they're going to launch in 2024. They are very good at it. They're our competition, and I think it's kind of a shame that we're not doing stuff cooperatively with them. But that has created competition, and that's why President Trump has said we're going to put a man and a woman on the moon in 2024. Whether we can do that or not remains to be seen, because the problem with space is it's a very expensive thing to do, and NASA does not have the money to complete that particular promise by 2024 unless they get more money. And as we all know, the Democrats and Republicans don't like each other anymore, so they are not going to be very easy to convince to give NASA more money, because one side or the other is going to say no when the other side says yes. So I think we got a few hurdles to go over. But I do believe that the competition with the rest of the world is eventually going to sort that out. And yeah, we'll go to the moon. We may not do it in 2024, but we'll go back.
Joey, I am so excited that you are here. I cannot tell you, because I have a little one who does not want to be an astronaut. He wants to be the boss of mission control. So we're very excited to see you here. I'm curious, you made a reference to the shuttle program. What are your feelings about the fact that we ended the shuttle program without something to replace it for manned travel?
Yeah, my career kind of ended in the Apollo program, so a shuttle it came much later for me. I think everybody kind of was very sad, when the program came to an end. We had to rely on another country to be able to put us into space. And the biggest tragedy, I think, was we had a strong team to put Apollo up there. We had great astronauts. We lost the last 3 missions where we couldn't afford. I guess that was a money thing. Interest dove right after Apollo 11. A little bit more, but it was going downhill with interest. So national will was the words that we used an awful lot of, that we had to have that national will that we wanted to do this. As far as the shuttle is concerned, of course, most of us on this table would like to see us continue on. It's like Al said, it's a matter of dollars and cents. There's other priorities out there, but we had the same problems in the 60s. We had things happening in the streets. We had Vietnam going on. So we've always had other competing priorities. And it's like, we hope the guys in Congress would open up a little bit and let us continue on. So it's kind of sad that we had to stop that program and depend on somebody else to get us up into space.
So I have another question about your work at Mission Control. So you get to actually talk to the astronauts when they're in space, correct?
Yeah, we had a capsule communicator, and he would be the individual that would talk to them. And he was an astronaut that talked to the astronauts.
So, and Greg, you've done some of that role too at Mission Control. Can you explain to me? I've had to watch the Apollo 11 documentary approximately 1,000 times, and what always amazes me is how calm everybody sounds when you're being jettisoned up into space or circling the moon. This is a pretty stressful time. How do you stay so calm?
Let me jump in on that a second. We had a guy by the name of Gene Kranz, and if we jumped a little bit out of our seat, sit back down. He was very demanding, and we had to focus. We weren't allowed to get too excited. We had to focus on what we were doing. So there wasn't a whole lot of time. We waited until they landed before we could explode and enjoy ourselves. So anyway, I'll pass it over to you now.
How do you stay calm?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the question, staying calm, from 2 perspectives. One is from the Capcom seat, because the Capcom is communicating to the crew, but the flight director's in charge. And that was an interesting relationship. And I'm sure it was a very interesting relationship in the Apollo days as well. Norm Knight was my flight director when I was talking to the Hubble crew, STS-125, and when they had an engine malfunction during that flight, which most people don't realize, as a Capcom, we just had to parrot what was being said at Mission Control and not make anything up. So it was pretty easy for us because we could talk the language within the Mission Control room from training, and then also hearing it and working with Mission Control from the Space Shuttle. Now, from the Space Shuttle perspective, it was a little bit different. Mission Control didn't give us a lot of information that we didn't need to have. And so I do remember launching, and I was surprised on the first flight where we got a master alarm 7 seconds off the pad. Very first flight in space, and the master alarm's going, it's not supposed to do that. But there were a whole team of smart engineers, flight controllers, back room, and of course the guys in the front room figuring it out. And so they told us what we needed. It was kind of hard, but we didn't want to ad-lib in the shuttle as well. So how did we stay calm? We just focused on the mission. And Al's got something to add to that.
Part of the code of conduct, if you're a test pilot, is that you stay cool. You always stay calm, cool, and collected, because if you have a problem and you get excited, you may not do the right thing. So the whole point as a test pilot is you always stay cool. The big story about test pilots is the guy is flying a new airplane and he knows he's going to crash in the ground, and he stays cool till he hits the ground. And he reads all the instruments calmly and coolly until he hits the ground. That is the epitome of being a test pilot. And that holds over into the space program. No matter what happens, you stay cool, because your best way of getting a solution to whatever the problem is you gotta be thinking through it. You cannot get too excited.
Dr. Cagle, you have a little bit of a different background than some of the people who have a flight pilot history. You're a medical doctor.
Right.
Did you always want to be an astronaut?
Always. As a matter of fact, here in Novato, I was at the top of an old oak tree talking to the man on the moon, and that was the night that a human was actually walking on the moon. And from that moment, my dreams took wings. I didn't look back. The only thing that sort of came in as a curveball was I didn't want to just see my footprint on the moon. I wanted to understand how the body changed, adapted, just how resilient, how fantastic the body is in different environments. In space, there's nothing like it on Earth.
And so based on your research, if we were to go to another planet, let's say Mars, it's close, nearby, cheap real estate, what do you think will happen to our bodies or human bodies if we are to colonize Mars?
Well, if we were to colonize Mars, our bodies would start to decondition somewhat. And that's the way the body adapts, because the body recognizes that when you're in reduced gravity, you don't need to work as hard. There's not as much load or resistance. So the body says, we don't need all the extra bones that you're carrying, and we don't need all the extra muscle mass. It's very easy to move in reduced gravity. It's harder just to kind of control or stop yourself. So your bones start to thin out, and your muscles start to weaken. Your heart starts to decondition, and your capacity to exercise you become less tolerant of it. And so that's what will happen to us. It's all right as long as you're floating around in weightlessness, but when you re-enter gravity, be that returning home or maybe going on to another planet, then you have those challenges. So my task and what we're learning is how we can keep the body not only conditioned and strong to maintain our muscle strength, but should we become injured, like say a simple sprained ankle or a sprained wrist, we're going to decondition even faster. So instead of weeks to get over an injury, we might only have a matter of days before we lose function of that limb. And so that's what we're doing. We're learning ways to accelerate and amplify our own body's restoration after deconditioning, overwork, or injury. But the best part about it, and this is what I'm most excited about, is that we can have our win even before we leave the planet, because many of the things that we learn medically, technically, we can apply right here for our own bodies and our lives and our conditions to improve our well-being and welfare here on Earth.
Talk. Oh, there we are. I think Yvonne would probably agree with me that physical conditioning is going to be a big issue going to Mars and back, because that's going to be a 1.5-year trip. The biggest problem, and one we have not solved, is radiation. And that is going to be the biggest problem we got going to Mars and back, because we're outside the magnetosphere of the Earth-Moon system, and we're going to be directly subject to sun's energy, and the radiation is going to be very, and we do not know yet how to protect the crew for a 1.5 years. That's going to be the biggest issue.
Well, and Dan, you were on the International Space Station for 6 months, so you probably know this better than anyone, what it's like to come back to Earth after being in zero gravity for so long. What was that like for you?
Yeah, one of the so there are some physical changes and challenges of being of long duration space flight. One of the other challenges is psychological. So when people ask me what's it like to live in space for 6.5 months, a lot of times I say, well, take your family on a Winnebago trip and never get out for 6.5 months, and see how you're all getting along after that. So there are some psychological challenges on long duration space flight like that. The physical challenges, basically for a 10, 11-day mission, it usually took about 3 or 4 hours to readapt to gravity. For a space station mission, after 6 months, it took about 3 or 4 days to kind of get used to gravity again. And what Yvonne said is that the human body is so good at adapting to many different things. The human body itself will figure out how to survive. The other thing to think about, I think, when I think of going to Mars is for a one-way transmission is 25, 28 minutes each way. So on these long year and a half missions, 2 years, like Al was talking about, we're going to have to learn how to think back to when the whaling ships went out for years at a time and very little communication. And when you had communication, it was very delayed. And that's a different kind of living. And we're going to be living, hopefully have large groups of people that will be there on Mars. But the psychological challenge of somewhat being isolated with smaller groups of people, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges.
Can you also talk a little bit about, because you did the shuttle missions and the ISS, what was the difference in preparing for those? And I mean, one of them was much shorter, but you're also on a space station with people that you didn't necessarily vote on to be there. So what was the difference between those two experiences?
Well, first of all, the training, for us, it took about 4 years. We were training before we went to space station, so that was different. A typical shuttle mission, you knew your crew, let's say a year and a half before the mission. And we did a lot more training together, survival training, water survival training. So that in it itself was challenging. But during what we found out was, let's say during the water survival training, you go through these stressful situations where you learned how your crew operated. And knew some signs that, okay, I better just leave that person alone for a while and then we'll come back. But even with that, we still had some interactions in space that were kind of surprising, but we all worked it out. So the biggest difference, I think, was the length of time that you'd be training. But yeah, it's not that much different than any other close friends or spouses. I'm sure all the couples here that are here tonight or today have never had any arguments, right? You never argue at all. Yeah, we never did either in space. So, but that gives you an idea of just learning how to recognize working together, understanding each other, and having patience with each other.
Now, Steve, you wanted to be an astronaut since you were very little, too. For everybody in the audience who wants to go to space someday, what do they have to do now to be an astronaut?
Well, first of all, let me say I flew in space with Dan, so we'll have to talk about whether he.
Now we
he
have to
enjoyed
talk
my
about what
company or
you
not.
argued about.
Only took, 20 years for me to find out this. So, anyway, for the children in the audience, so at NASA, it's not just about being an astronaut. We're just a really small part of this giant organization that does many things. We have people doing 500 different jobs. So, for example, when I went to fix the Hubble Space Telescope, someone had to invent the tools that we used. Someone had to show us how to use them. Well, that was Ed's job. So I was only successful because Ed and all his colleagues came up with these brilliant tools that we used and trained us on how to use them. And so when we come back from space, we stand in front of the crowds and we just remind them that the real heroes of the space program are not the astronauts. It's really our families who watch us ride these rockets into space and people like Ed and Joey down there who support the team. So we're really grateful. They're the ones that protect our lives. In terms of the tools that Ed invented, one was a drill, and it had a 7/16" driver on it. And if you take that tool on Earth and put it on a bolt head and pull the trigger, the bolt will turn, right? In space, since there's no gravity, if you put that on the bolt and pull the trigger, what turns? The astronaut. So the astronaut's doing circles. So whenever we wanted to do that, we made sure all the cameras were off. I swear. We never did that with your $700,000 drill before. No footage exists about that, but man, it was fun. I just killed our reputation, and we're so serious in space. So anyway, back to the children. If you can come work for a math or science or technology company, you'll be really richly rewarded because it's so exciting. We invent amazing things and we go amazing places. And there's all kinds of jobs available in those. And so as a young person, what we suggest you do is, of course, do well in school. Listen to all the advice from your parents that they always give you. Be a good person. Don't get in trouble with the law. Eat well. Exercise a lot. But most important, keep looking for what you love. Because when you find that job that you love, then it's not work. And when the alarm goes off in the morning, you love going to work. So maybe that's inventing the foods and preparing the foods that the astronauts take. Maybe it's inventing the tools that they will use and train them. Maybe it's doing the accounting for NASA. You've got to find what you dream of, what's your passion. And the other advice I'll give you is along the way, anytime you have the opportunity to learn about a career or a job, content, take that chance. So you're here today, you're listening to a wide variety of people. The parents in the audience have enabled that. Make sure you say thank you. But look for your passion. Don't decide I'm going to do that, because that may not be what you want to do. Find the passion.
So, Ed, I think I Googled you more than anyone else, because every time I would go somewhere, I would find another program that you were instrumental in, whether it was Hubble or the spacesuits or what you're doing now. How did you manage to have a hand in like every exciting part of the space program?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. Sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump. You know, I was just very fortunate. I went to the University of Delaware as a communications major, and I came home after the first semester, and a fellow named Bob Craig, I used to cut his grass when I was a kid, lived down the street. He came knocking on my father's door one Saturday, asked me what I was doing for work that summer. I explained I worked for Mr. Davison's construction company. He asked me how much they were paying me. I told him, he said, I'll pay you 25 cents more an hour, and you get to stay inside in the air conditioning. I said, doing what? And he said, a suit subject. I said, what the heck is a suit subject? He said, well, the company I work for is building a spacesuit for NASA. This is 1976. I said, I thought they were wrapping that whole NASA thing up. No. We got a new program, and they're going to reuse everything. So I tried it out, fell in love with it. I fell in love with all the thought process, you know, what it takes. And I came in very early in the program. Company I worked for was called ILC Dover. They were just awarded the contract for this new suit. My boss was transferred down to Houston, Texas. I said, man, if there's something down there for me, send for me. And he did. And I got in at a very terrific point in the program, because every time something new was going on, I'd managed to sniff it out and insert myself into it. And so it was just, again, being in the right place at the right time and working hard. Once you find that passion, once you see something you want to do, go after it. I still get excited about getting up in the morning and going to work. My knees don't, but I do. It's still a lot of fun.
Can you talk, since you do have a foot in private industry now, can you talk a little bit about what private corporations, what role they're going to play in the space program moving forward, particularly since it seems to be so difficult to get the sufficient funding from the government?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot.
I thought I was original.
Ask, how do you feel about that commercial sector? Well, first, I am in the commercial sector. I think it's great because it's what we're supposed to be doing. NASA has the leverage to go after something new, develop it, and then turn it over and let somebody else really work it. We've been hanging out in low Earth orbit here for 30-something years, and it's really time that NASA got back to doing, in my humble opinion, what it's supposed to be doing, and that's extending man's reach into the cosmos. So, there's so many things we could talk about here, spin-off technology and how that's applied to, Earth-based benefit. So I think it's good that the commercial sector is involved. I'd like to see them do more of that and free NASA up to exploring.
Let me just add a comment to what Ed was talking about. I think the commercial companies that are working in space, like SpaceX, Blue Origin, maybe even Boeing, Sierra Nevada, but I think primarily Blue Origin and SpaceX are revolutionizing how we go to space. Elon Musk, who's of course owns SpaceX, has been quoted as saying that we are not going to be able to do in space what we want to do unless we reuse the launch vehicles. And his comparison is, think about the time when we first started flying airplanes. What if we could fly an airplane one time and then we had to throw it away? How far would we be flying airplanes today? Not very far. How about going on a boat trip and then you throw the boat away after you've made your trip? Same thing. So the most economical way to go to space is to reuse the booster, and SpaceX and Blue Origin are both leading the way to do that, and they've both been very successful doing that. And I don't know how anybody who's watched on television a SpaceX launch, that's one thing, but I will guarantee you the most exciting part of that is watching a booster come down out of the sky and landing on a pad, a specific pad in an absolute perfect spot. So that's what they're doing for us. They're pushing us into reusable launch vehicles, and that's going to be the savior of the space program.
And Aubrey, so, 100 years ago, when they first invented commercial aviation, only the wealthy got to go. It was dangerous, and no one ever thought it would really be a common thing. So now it's common. The same thing is going to happen in commercial spaceflight. Believe it or not, maybe it's 50 years from now, maybe it's 100 years from now, but people will fly in space quite frequently. And I'm really pleased to point out that in this tent right now, there are 3 people who purchased tickets to go in space on another company called Virgin Galactic. They're standing right over there, waving their hands. And so that is the same theme that Al's talking about. They will go up on a spaceship that goes up into space, up to 60 miles, I think it is. They'll experience weightlessness. The vehicle will come back to Earth. They'll get out, and then other people will go. So have a chance to talk to them at the Virgin Galactic booth.
There's Steve. There's another thing that is coming along right now. There is a company in England called Reaction Motors, and they're building an engine that they could put in an airplane, and it will take them all the way to space. The engine converts to a different kind of rocket as it gets up to altitude. It converts automatically into a rocket that will put that airplane into space. That is going to help revolutionize what we do in space if they get it perfected. Very, very difficult technical challenge, but they're halfway there. They've already demonstrated the engine. So they're almost there. And I think we're going to see some wonderful things come in space where you can get in an airplane, take off from a runway, go to space, and then come back.
So I see Ken is about ready to get one of the microphones so we can take questions from the audience. But before we do that, we have a lightning round. So one-word answers. This is where the questions get hard. Ready? Are you ready? You're going to go first.
Okay.
Star Wars
Okay, the
or
answer is
Star
no.
Trek? Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Joey?
Star Trek.
Star Wars.
Star Trek.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Trekkies.
The least favorite thing you ate in space or tried as maybe in the cafeteria? Your least favorite space food? Come on, all of it's nasty. I know it is.
Mushy cereal.
I haven't run anything that I disliked. I'm sorry. I enjoy everything I eat.
I loved it all, too.
Oh, my gosh. You guys are easy.
If you cook like I do, it's all good.
That's very diplomatic. All right, last question before we go to the audience. What would you name the next manned spaceship that we launch from the United States? So we had Endeavour, Columbia, all these. What would you name them?
Human spaceship
Yes.
from Earth. Yvonne?
Galaxy.
Somebody needs to drop the mic. Nobody can follow that one. All right. Nobody dares. All right, let's take questions from the audience, Ken. Anybody have one?
Oh, a little questioner right here. Here you
What happens if you can't do the barbecue roll in the spacecraft and it doesn't roll?
Repeat the question.
What happens if barbecue roll fails?
Oh, well, if it fails, you're going to have a hot side of the spacecraft and a cold side of the spacecraft. We'll be in trouble. We got to roll. Yeah, it's going to be super hot and super cold, so you got to keep that thing rotating so that you have an even heat distribution.
Yeah, I had to do that all the way to the moon because of the sun's energy. If we stayed in one attitude and didn't move around any, the heated side, the side that was on the sun, the surface temperature would go up to about 350 degrees. On the shadowed side, on the other side, it would drop to about minus 250. So there would be a 600-degree temperature differential across the spacecraft. And that was too much. We didn't want to do that. So we slowly rotated all the way to the moon for 4 days, called the barbecue.
Yeah, we humans sitting here have had about a million years of adapting to our current situation, our current physiology. As a physician, and what I'm wondering about, you're going to go to Mars, you're going to go to the moon, you're going to have to live inside a space station without ever going outside, without having anything on you, without a space suit, oxygen, and things that you need. How are you going to adapt to that overnight?
And you mean on the inside of it?
Stay inside. In order to get outside, we have to come into space. How are we going to adapt to that?
How are we going to adapt to having to put a spacesuit on every time we go outside while we live inside and without that kind of protection? Yeah. So you're absolutely right. We can't open a window or a door without having some kind of protected, pressurized suit on to keep all of our circulation and organs functioning properly. So basically, the entire time that you're without a suit, you need to stay indoors. And that's going to be really difficult to adapt to. But we don't see the suit in the same way that most people see it as a wardrobe. We actually see it as a vehicle. So that vehicle now enables us to be able to not just go outside, but to take day trips and to travel and to explore. So it sort of becomes our escape valve or our recess to be able to change the environment, which is so important for us psychologically. Because although our bodies do change and adapt to being in space, our psychology doesn't adapt quite as well. We still are kind of space-minded when we're up in space, even though our bodies are adapting. So it's important for us to be mobile and to have mobility suits is why we call it that. It's always going to be a challenge, and who knows, if we're there long enough, maybe our lungs, maybe our circulatory system will adapt to the atmosphere or environment that we're in, and either we'll be able to tolerate it more or for longer periods of time, or maybe the children that we have there will be well adapted.
So my question is, if you could name if you could choose a spaceship to fly in by yourself with no crew, which one would it be?
If you could go into a spaceship with no crew, what would it be like? All by yourself.
Fun. It'd be great fun. You'd enjoy it. I spent 3 days by myself in lunar orbit, and that was the best time of flight because I got rid of those two guys for a while.
Well, what's it like to be on, in the spaceship by yourself, orbiting the moon?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with training. I learned to fly in the Air Force single-seat fighter planes, so I was very used to being by myself. Also, after being cooped up with those guys for 4.5 days in something the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, it's kind of nice to get rid of them. There are two things about being by yourself in space. One is there's a thing called lonely, and there's a thing called alone. They're not the same thing. I was alone, but I guarantee you I was not lonely. And the best part of that orbit for me was what was on the backside, and I didn't even have to talk to Mission Control.
All right, so I'm going to, talk about an alternative view. I totally understand the being alone part because on the space station it's big enough, and Dan can certainly talk to this. You can get by yourself for quite some time, which you can't really do that on the space shuttle. And I did cherish those moments, but it's also wonderful to share the experience with another person. And I've always been, I was a single seat guy.
I didn't want to share with those two guys.
Okay, well that's fair enough. But the crews that you're assigned to also probably make a difference. But as we navigate through our lives, it is important to share.
I would have to say my favorite one. I love the landers. Any of the landers that bring you from space onto the surface of the moon. The landers are the best thing of all, and we're going to be designing new ones. But I'd have to say my favorite one has always been Atlantis, only because I think it sounds like the ocean, and space is really just a big, vast ocean without the water, and we're fish that can float without having to have waves. But the best one of all is going to be the one that you build. Let me know.
I have one back here.
This is a question for Dr. Cagle. Hi, I've met you before. So, but you talked about physical changes to the body. What about the brain? Do you understand or have an idea about what would happen to the brain?
Great question. What happens to the brain when you're in reduced gravity space or... Well, we'll start at the end of the table here. No, I'm kidding. No. Well, to start off with, I think one of the best health exercises for the brain is to not just be able to take space or take up space, but to give space to others. And that's something we can start training here on the planet. But we have observed a number of things, and on August 19th of this year at the Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley, we're actually going to have a Space Brain Summit of people coming from all over, from Brazil to Harvard to Stanford to NASA to everywhere. And we're going to talk about the things that we observe. And what we basically observe is that the brain, it adapts by, first of all, when you go to space, a lot of your body volume floats up into your brain. So if you've ever kind of had a cold or a sinus infection and your brain feels foggy, that's kind of what's going on. And if that happens too long and you add radiation and carbon dioxide, elevated levels, lack of sustainable nutrition and exercise, but above all, sleep deprivation or disruption, then all of those things can take a strain on the brain. We call it brain strain. What's amazing is that all of these things happen, and we do see some changes in certain vision of certain astronauts, and some of their cognitive performance. But it's amazing that the changes that we see, for as much accumulation as that happens, is the way that these amazing people are able to train and perform and recover when they come back. So the body is incredibly resilient, and a lot of the changes that we see, we think are adaptation. But as we learn how to minimize that and make the brain in the best condition, we can use those same solutions here on Earth where it doesn't happen as fast, but the effects can be deeper. So for things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, some of the, or concussion even, our young people moving around or accidents, we can actually use some of these strategies to help. One of the most amazing things, and I compliment the astronauts on it through the generations, is that they've trained in different ways. And so through the years, they've slept in different positions, all the way from flat to head down tilt, and to some propped up. And we found that one of the best interventions for some of the brain fluid accumulation is to just change the position that you sleep in. And in space, if we prop you up a little bit, we suspect that may help quite a bit. But the important thing is that the same brain that, again, you leave the planet with may not be the same one you return with. So the more that you can make it smart, cognitive, creative, the more it's going to serve you well and then be a gift when you return back as well. So
Hey,
it's the
Yvonne?
only one you've got. Take good care.
Yeah, Yvonne, I've heard that it might not be an issue when we go to Mars, because by the time we get to Mars, radiation is going to turn our brain into mush, and we won't have to worry about it after that.
And from what I've been able to study, that would be an improvement for some of us. No, not you. I'm starting. It starts here at home. That's why I want to.
Hey, Yvonne, I think I'm already there.
That's why, Al. That's why I want to leave the planet, because it would be an improvement for me.
Hi, I'm asking for Leah. How does the moon and the Earth and Mars looks from the spaceship?
The moon and
How does Moon and Earth look from space?
Yeah, so people have asked me today, they say, what was your favorite part about being on space station or being in space? The favorite part was looking at Earth. The Earth is a beautiful, beautiful place. And we go around it once every 90 minutes. We go 5 miles a second, and it changes. The Earth rotates basically underneath us. And every time you look out, I mean, it was hard not to look out the window. So, and the moon, it just seems brighter and bigger. And when you see moonrise, every orbit, or moonset every orbit, it's so beautiful. I have to say, I never did look for Mars when I was up on space station, so that's why I need to go back and look for it.
Is that working? There we go.
I don't really have a question. I would just like to say that, and I'm sure everybody here can agree, that I am absolutely humbled and in awe of each and every one of you. You are absolutely true American heroes, and thank you. Thank you.
Any questions on this side? I've had my back to you.
Ken, I have one.
All right, up, down there.
I heard that Buzz Aldrin saw a UFO or something when he was up there. I would like to hear comments from you guys on that topic.
That's nonsense. He never saw a UFO. He only talked about it 30 years after his flight. He wouldn't talk about it before then. So who knows? I mean, you got to go back and kind of imagine. But let me tell you a little thing about UFOs. I've been asked many times, have you ever seen a UFO? And I say, no, I've never seen a UFO. Well, how would you know? I say, well, if somebody brought me a piece of a UFO that I could analyze, and I knew it was something that was not here on Earth, then I'd say, okay, I will change it from a UFO to an IFO, okay? We would know what it is. Now, the next question is, have you ever seen an alien? The answer is yes. Of course, I've seen an alien. The next question is, how do you see an alien? I say, every morning when I get up and look in the mirror, I see an alien.
I can make a little comment on that. I think I know the documentary you're talking about, when Buzz was talking about seeing something out there, and they were afraid to tell Mission Control that, hey, I'm seeing something out there. So he asked where one of the stages was. He says, is it close to where we are? Thinking maybe what he saw was one of the stages. When the ground control said, no, that stage you're looking for is too far away. It's not there. They didn't want to tell anybody in Mission Control because they're afraid, hey, if there's something up there we can't identify, we're going to bring them back down. So his comment on the documentary says, and those guys on the ground had no idea what was going on. That was my crowning glory, because then they showed a picture of me on the ground not knowing what was going on. And that was kind of embarrassing. So, yeah, that was my comment. Poor timing on my part when he made that comment.
We have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. And this lady up here in front.
So this is for Yvonne Kegel. So Mark and Scott Kelly one went into space, one stayed home, and you have the twin brothers. How much have you learned from the fact that one was on ground and one was in space?
The short story is actually I like the way Mark and Scott Kelly talked about it. First of all, They said that they drew straws, and Mark stayed on Earth, and Scott went into space. And Mark said, the one who stayed on Earth, that he got the short straw. So that says a lot. What we have discovered, again, is that there were changes that happened in both the DNA and the body and the brain, all the things that we're talking and studying now. We don't know all, but we're really learning some exciting things. And that's how we know that things change and you're not the same when you come back to the point where the twins are no longer twins. Yeah. They're still brothers, though. And Mark still got the short straw.
All right, we have one over here.
I heard that when you're on the space shuttle, that because of the lack of gravity, there's actually more of a weight to your tongue, and that when you come back, it's harder to talk. Did you guys experience that at all, and how long did it take?
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard that. I don't remember. I mean, the number one thing I felt was after 6.5 months after landing, my arms felt like they weighed about 20 pounds, and it took a while to get used to that. And then also, Steve's reminding me, after being up in orbit for several months, if you ever want to get the most beautiful callus-free feet in the world, go to space. Because we don't get our calluses, my commander reminded me of space station. That's why we wear socks, Dan. Because one time I floated down to his part of space station, wasn't wearing my socks, and he could see the flakes coming off the bottoms of my feet. Yeah, kind of gross, but you get beautiful feet up there. But that's the first time I heard about the tongue. But I do remember the first time I was in orbit, I was resting, and I saw my arms doing this. And it was just the pulse, my blood being pumped through my body. Every once in a while, I would see my arms slightly extend, and that was my heartbeat.
So I'm going to share a story about the adaptable body in space. I just went on short missions. They were 16 days each. And so, but after 16 days, I got recalibrated, my hand-eye coordination. And so, yeah, they gave me the little Diet Coke here. Last year I got a full-size one. But anyway, I had a Diet Coke. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just joking, Ken. But I had a Diet Coke, hadn't had a Diet Coke for over 2 weeks. And my 10-year-old daughter, I had her in my left arm. And I had my first Diet Coke in 2 weeks in my right hand. And the NASA administrator came to shake my hand as a rookie pilot who had just come back from his first space shuttle mission. And normally you'd do this little handoff thing, kind of like this. I can't do it. So I just released the Diet Coke and shook the man's hand. And, didn't even think anything about it. And then my 10-year-old daughter goes, "Daddy, why did you drop your Diet Coke all over the NASA administrator's Cole Haan shoes?" And I said, "Because I thought it'd stay there. Because you really do think it's staying there. And it takes days to get used to gravity again."
Have you ever talked about the fact you didn't let her go? Has she ever asked about that?
And the wife said, "And now give me the
famous
baby."
astronaut.
Releases his daughter.
I have one last question over here from a future astronaut. Are you ready? Do you know what his question is?
He asked, what happens if you drop your ice cream and you're on the moon?
What happens if you drop your ice cream and you're on the moon?
5-second roll gets extended.
Very good. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Ken and Debbie, for this amazing event. Thank you for letting the Chronicle be a part of it. And thank you all for your service.
told by many of the astronauts, the Apollo astronauts in particular, that they feel as if we are completing their mission.
I've done this probably about 15 years. This is Christmas, birthday, Halloween all wrapped into one.
When I was 11 years old, they had the first moon landing, and I remember my father getting me and my sisters, and I felt so proud because I was 11 years old and it was Apollo 11. And so since then I've been collecting artifacts and saving everything, and now I use all this, to outreach to the public and the kids.
This is special because I've had a fascination with space ever since I was young.
What would you name the next manned spaceship?
Galaxy.
We need to remember the Earth is our home. We get into space through its very thin dome. So we will be careful and treat it with love while down there on Earth or here floating above.